How's it going, everybody? Todd from Toddtronics. Today we're going to be taking a look at a early build of MinUI available for the Anbernic RG CubeXX. Now, MinUI has been available for a plethora of systems. I will put them on screen here so you can see it has wide compatibility across a lot of different things. It's very easy to get up and going compared to other custom firmware options. Now, today's video will not be an install guide, as we have a fantastic install guide that was done by Zoo, as well as an amazing written guide that you can pair together, follow along, and you should be able to get this up and going on your device. However, bear in mind what we are looking at today is not a full build. It is a fairly early look. It's still in active development. I've encountered a few small bugs already myself, but it is something that a lot of people are already using on other devices, so maybe they want to see how it will look if they transition over to the CubeXX. So that's what we're going to be doing here today. There we are. We have the boot screen logo for MinUI. Now, a lot of people like MinUI literally because the namesake, minimum UI, minimum user interface. It very much resembles an analog pocket. However, a fair warning to people that haven't done any research into this, there are quite a lot of systems that are not in development for this custom firmware option. So if you're somebody that's looking to play a little bit of PSP or a lot of the arcade-centric titles, or even things like Dreamcast and a few others that I'm not thinking of off the top of my head, you are going to lose some functionality, and that is a bummer for a lot of people. I like to get that out of the way right away because I don't want anyone's expectations to get hurt when they watch the whole video and then they find out at the end, oh man, I can't play games from my favorite system. So just bear that in mind when you're watching this video. What you see on here is the vast majority of what's available to be played with MinUI. Now, there is some support for the Pico 8 Retro Arch version, as well as I've heard of some community development done, but I kind of wanted to take a look at the base version of what you would get straight off the GitHub if you were to install this today. But one of the pros that I like about MinUI is that to get this up and running, you do not actually have to format your card and flash a brand new SD card to get this going. You can get this going by dragging a few files on your SD card 1 and then a few more files on your SD card 2 straight as it ships to you from Anbernic, which I think is really good for a lot of people that want to try custom firmware but are kind of not comfortable, you know, maybe wiping a card out and formatting it on something like Balena Etcher. So that is a really nice positive that we have here with this. The very first thing that I noticed was that there is no RGB support for the analog sticks. I don't think too many people are going to care a whole lot about that, but it's something that is obvious to me right on the first boot up. There's nowhere in like a toolkit or anything like that, or a patch or anything that I've seen so far at the time of recording that allows you to enable that. I don't really care too much for the RGB on the joysticks. If I do usually leave it running on something like my 40XXV, I tend to color match it white to the device and leave it at that. And I did set this up with a games card that I got straight from an Anbernic device. So if you look through my recently played, you'll see that I have some of those dreaded numbers in front of some of my game titles. However, quick warning, they do use a different folder structure for games, for BIOS, and for save files. So when you get your download from the GitHub, make sure that you go to your games card if you already have a games card that you're used to using, and make sure you just change the names on those folders. Pretty easy to do. If you watch Zoo's video, he shows you the way that he does it. I think that works perfect. It's just something you got to know if you're going to just slap in a games card in here and expect it to work. There's going to be a little bit of small work involved, but nothing too cumbersome. Now, just looking at the front end here, obviously it's very minimum. That's kind of what they were going for here. You're not going to have any system artwork or any fancy tunes playing in the background, you know, none of that menu music type stuff. But there's also not a whole lot of options to mess with and kind of make an issue with using the device, which is really nice. So this could be something good if you're setting up a handheld for like a small child or a gift for somebody, and you don't want to have them calling you at 2 in the morning because they messed something up. There's not really any settings that you can dig into that I think will do too much destructive damage to your usability of your device, which is good. That's definitely a plus. Now, one thing I very much enjoy about MinUI in the last few days that I've been using it is that you have this recently played selection here at the very top of your front end menu. And if you notice here under resume, if you hit the X button, you can push that and you'll be right back into where you created your last save state. And creating a save state is as simple as hitting the mode button and then hitting save. Now, one of my absolute favorite features of MinUI is the ability to quick resume a game on shutdown. So handhelds, they get used out and about in the real world. Sometimes you need to stuff it in your pocket and you don't have time to deal with finding a save point in a game, or you just don't want to have to worry about it and you want to shut it down quickly. And when you shut down a game mid-game in MinUI, you're going to get this quick save created powering off. So what it basically just did was create a save state right where you were in your game. And when you power back on the device, it's going to boot straight back into that game. So powering on from a cold start on MinUI isn't terribly long. I'd say maybe 15 or so seconds. And then once it loads back up, you're going to load directly back into your game where you left off. And that's really handy. I think other things like Garlic OS were the first to do something like that, or Onion OS if you're on a MIUI Mini device. And it's just super, super, super handy to have. Like I said, I'm a big fan of it. I think every operating system should do something similar. Now, here we are in Castlevania Symphony of the Night. Good, nice little Halloween time game, you know, because you got Dracula and you got the spooky themes and everything going on. But I wanted to show the screen scaling options as well as some newer features I believe that have come to MinUI, at least since I last used it. So if you hit the mode button on your Anbernic CubeXX and you go over to options and front end, you're going to see by default it's set to aspect ratio. And then if you go over, what I like to use is cropped. So it brings up the screen ever so slightly, something similar to like an 8:7 maybe aspect ratio, but it fills in that screen real estate good. None of the sprites or anything look wonky or out of place, which is nice. And then if you want to take it a step further, something I love to do in any emulator, especially if it's done properly, is put on scan lines. A lot of these pixel sprites that we grew up watching on our CRT TVs look completely different than they do on an LCD without those scan lines. Kind of changes the overall feel and vibe. I can maybe put up a screenshot to kind of give you an idea of what I mean by that here. But if you go over, we do have scan lines already available to us right from in that menu, and they do look pretty good. The only gripe that I have with scan lines, and it's not a big one, but it is something to note, is that it is going to darken your screen ever so slightly. But it does really help to shape out those sprites to make them look exactly how they should. And since we showed scan lines in PlayStation 1, it would only be fair to show what it's like to have the screen grid effect on things like your Game Boy Color games. It does darken the screen as well, but man, it makes that look so much more authentic. It's not coming through on camera nearly as drastic as it is in person, but as someone who had a Game Boy Color as a kid as his first handheld, this is definitely the way that these games should be played, and I'm happy it's something super easy to just enable right from a menu. And because I know Game Boy is going to be played a lot on a system like this, I thought I would showcase that there are a few different emulator options for different color palettes. So right now I have it set to Game Boy DMG, but there's all kinds of different ones that you could do if you wanted a different look and feel. For me personally, I could see myself setting this on a game-by-game basis to kind of get a feel and mood for the type of game. Like for Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, I'm really liking this SGB-1E. I don't know, it's like a mix of like tans and greens and blacks and browns. But I don't know, it's really easy on the eyes and I like it. It still feels kind of similar to the original Game Boy, but obviously adds a little bit more depth if you ask me. Now, growing up, I was a big JRPG guy. The Game Boy Advance gave us quite a lot of those, and as a kid, I was very spoiled for choice. But going back and playing some of those games now, there's a lot of tech sequences that are very slow, very painful, and through the power of emulation on pretty much every operating system I've used, being able to fast forward through things has been a godsend. I'm going to show you how to set that up here because it isn't exactly set up for you how you would expect. So the first thing is if you go into front end, you can actually choose the maximum fast forward speed that you want to allow the fast forward to do. And it goes all the way up to 8x. Now, if you want it to be just fast enough that you can still read the text, but it's not boring, you could slow that down. But before you can even get into that, you need to actually enable a shortcut for it. So as you see here, I have put it to toggle fast forward because I don't want to have to hold it down, but you do have options for both. I hit A here. I'm going to do the mode plus R1. That's what I like to do. It's what I'm most familiar with. So if we get back into the game, we're in this beginning sequence here where Isaac's getting woken up and the boulders are going everywhere. It already has pretty fast text for a JRPG game. I will give Golden Sun that. But if we want to make it a bit faster, as you can see, now we're blazing fast at that 8x speed. Again, you can slow that down for things. I might set that down to 4x, especially for things like battle sequences. But this can make playing those older JRPG games way more fun. In fact, I would probably advise that you play Golden Sun sped up. It will get you through the game at like 3 times the speed, but you might actually find yourself enjoying it a lot more. Now, getting into some practice mode for Tekken 3. One thing I noticed when playing PlayStation, this is the one thing that popped up that I could not find a workaround or a fix for, was if I click either the left thumbstick or the right thumbstick in any PlayStation game, it is going to pull up the menu. Now, as far as I'm aware, there's not really any PlayStation game that would not function because you need to be able to click these sticks in. However, it's just something I wanted to point out because I did notice I did not find a way of changing it. I went into controls. There really wasn't any way to change the binding for either analog stick. You go into emulator, it doesn't seem like there's anything in the emulator that's causing that to happen. But just something to note. It's just one thing that I saw. So my thoughts on MinUI on the Anbernic RG CubeXX is I actually really love a lot of the features that are available to it. I love the ability to shut down mid-game and boot back into the game, something similar we've seen in like Onion OS or Garlic OS. I do love the ability to add scan lines and color palettes and grid overlays and things like that to all my favorite systems. It's really easy to set your hotkeys up for fast forwarding. I do like that they give you total control over the fast forward speed. I do love that this is something you could set up for somebody and give it to them, and they probably wouldn't accidentally tick a setting or anything like that that would inhibit them from enjoying their gameplay. The main cons that I see with this is that there are a huge amount of systems that I play on my Anbernic devices every day that are not officially supported by the developer. It seems like he's not interested in making those things from people that have talked to him. So there are some community workarounds. There's also an extra pack that you can install in here that'll get you a few more systems. But as far as straight from the development team or the developer, you're going to be missing out on quite a few systems. But if you're mainly somebody that's looking to play Game Boy, Game Boy Color, Game Boy Advance, you know, your Super Nintendo and your NES, Genesis, things like that, PlayStation 1, I think that what is here right now currently is quite good. I didn't have any crashes or any major bugs or anything like that. I did experience one bug where I was having a problem with one of the analog sticks kind of auto firing in a certain direction. But I just kind of redid my install on the SD card and just kind of was a little more careful, and it seemed like that fixed it. So I'm going to attribute that to my own fault somehow. I'm not sure what I did, but it's working great now. The other thing that I really love is the ease of install. It's super easy to get going. Like I said, you do use a 2-card system, so you're going to need your stock Anbernic firmware card. You're going to drag a file over to that. Then you're going to need to set up your games card and drag some files over there. But it's nothing cumbersome. It's nothing tricky or confusing or anything like that. We have amazing written guides and video guides that I'll link down below for you to be able to watch and follow along. That's what I did to actually install it here. So I know that that information is still relevant even for the CubeXX. It is one thing. There is one thing that might trip you up a little bit. Is it's going to ask you which device you're installing it for, and you're going to use the RG35XX Plus folder, and that's just because that's for the H700 series, but that will work on here.